talking HEAVENQUEST, a Pilgrim's Progress. Now this one is directed by Matt Billen and is a fantasy movie which is a thinly based allegory for a faith-based spiritual journey. Based on a 17th century religious book, essentially. This is now adapted multiple times, and apparently the book has never been out of print. And here we have it adapted into a kind of fantasy movie, but still following that kind of spiritual journey. Now, this obviously being a faith-based film, this is going to hold more of an interest to certain people more than others. Now, just for clarity, I will say I am not a religious person at all. I am completely not interested in religion one way or the other. So I'm going to purely be looking at this from just a film entertainment perspective and how well the movie was made. Anyway, what is the story? So it focuses on this particular character who, at the beginning of the movie, we see captured by the kind of the ruling king of the Southern Lands, and this guy is, you know, the bad guy essentially. The Southern Lands, you get where I'm going with that, and he thinks he's just a regular guy, but he has a prophecy. You know, he is fated for greater things. Anyway, he manages to escape and ends up meeting a variety of different people along the way who help him to the journey to the north, to this king who, you know, is ever living and all of this, and is the virtue of hope and everything like that. Along the way, obviously, there's various kind of dangers, and he's pursued by the southern kind of evil army and their kind of horde of orc-like demonic creatures. What will happen? Well, you'll have to watch the movie to find out, unless you are familiar with this book. So let's discuss, obviously, what works first of all. Now, this is a relatively low-budget movie, but I've got to say I still thought the production value here was pretty good. For a, obviously, you know, relatively meagre budget film. The things like the costuming here was I got to say, I was really impressed. It really does have some really kind of like nice kind of costuming. The attention to detail here was very, very impressive. And then we get some really kind of like cool looking kind of armour, and all of which is very kind of unique and kind of symbolic in a lot of ways when you sort of see it. The actual cinematography, things like set design, the location shooting, props, I gotta say, I thought were a very good standard. Now, maybe I'm used to watching lots of low-budget films, and I've seen a lot of people say, oh, it looks low-budget, when I was kind of reading the kind of the reviews, but I gotta say, you know, for a relatively meagre budget movie, this is still quite impressive stuff, I will say. And the movie, like I said, is a hopeful film. So it essentially follows a quest, I should probably guess from the title, and it's more or less a kind of a hero's journey. So it's quite a kind of uplifting movie with no too kind of depressing parts and things like that. There are a couple of kind of fight scenes which are reasonably handled. The cast here are, you know, all kind of like pretty people and everything like that, and It does go at a reasonable pace as well. I think it's a relatively kind of like well-paced movie. It's not particularly complicated. I feel you can probably still enjoy this if you are not really aware of the faith elements, or you simply don't care. It does get a little bit heavy-handed, particularly kind of towards the end. But before that, and, you know, even maybe to a point up to the end, if you don't really pay too much attention to it, I think you can probably watch this and not going to get too kind of like, oh God, I'm being preached to and all like this kind of stuff. It's still, you know, I would say is a watchable film story-wise, you know, for those elements, even taking that out aside. But obviously, if you are familiar with the story or obviously on the religious side, then you may get more out of this than maybe someone who isn't. What doesn't work? Some of the acting here is a little bit over-dramatic at times. Now, when I was watching this movie, I was actually reminded of the 80s style kind of like sword and sorcery movies that you got from the kind of Roger Corman studios. Now, The movie doesn't look like this. It looks like a contemporary film, but the story, the kind of the dialogue and what kind of happens, particularly I would say in the first two acts of this movie, it really seems like, without the kind of the boobs and stuff that you get in the kind of the 80s sword and sorcery movies, that's definitely not in this one. But nonetheless, it just kind of reminded me of those kind of like the Deathstalker movies, the Wizards of the Lost Kingdom, that sort of thing. The story-wise and some of the characters as well, the kind of like the events that happen in the movie, I thought, you know, it does have a modern veneer, it does have a modern and somewhat contemporary look to it, but story-wise and plot beats, it did remind me of them so much. So maybe, you know, if you're a fan of the old sword and sorcery movies, there is something to enjoy here on top of that. But it does have a more polished, you know, modern feel to it. So it's had a modern feel, but almost like a little bit of a retro story bait. I mean, obviously the actual book that it's based on is a particularly old book, so not a lot of kind of huge amounts of plot twists and things like that in regards to its source material. It does get a little preachy, like I've mentioned. I think maybe for some people, particularly at the end, it's a little bit more heavy-handed. The second half of the last act, really, it's like, oh God, it's getting a little bit too, you know, heavy-handed. But the fact of the matter is that it is based on a faith-based material, so you kind of got to expect it to a certain degree. I think largely you can kind of enjoy it outside of that, but, you know, nonetheless, it is there. You know, if I had to judge this movie based purely on its own merits, I've got to say I think it is actually an above-average movie for fantasy fans, purely, you know, based on its, I think, relatively good filmmaking here, to be quite honest with you. I mean, there's not loads of battles. It's actually relatively fighting light and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, there are a couple here. But I feel like it's such a lavishly produced film. And, you know, with some nice attention to detail, some nice camera work. Really great costuming and kind of location shooting. There's a little bit of obvious green screen at the beginning, but, you know, I would put this one at a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to you next time.